are in the best and the worst place to be right now. What is the situation on the ground?
I think we can look at Donald Trump's tweet, President Trump's tweet, as a bit of an outlier, really, of the messaging we're seeing from his allies, quite coordinated in laying the blame squarely at the foot of the Assad regime. President Emmanuel Macron of France, clear that he believes and says he has proof that a chemical weapon, or at least chlorine, was used in the attack in Douma over the weekend, which killed 40 people and affected about 500 or so. Now, that is important because the specific nature of the gas is key here. In the past, in October 2013 and in April 2017, it has been the use of sarin gas, a palpable and horrifying nerve agent that caused the international community to sit up and, in Barack Obama's case in 2013, not take military action but get the Russians to persuade Syria to give up their chemical weapons, and back in April last year, Donald Trump to launch 59 Tomahawk missiles to an airfield in Syria that was considered responsible. Issue here is that chlorine, which is the gas named by Emmanuel Macron, really the first leader to come forward and say he has palpable proof at this stage, coherent proof. Chlorine's been used many different times, allegedly by many sides in this war. It's a domestic cleaning product and can, of course, be very harmful to people in concentrated doses. But some of the UN who've reviewed the time there may be of gases or substances used, nerve agents and chlorine, to disguise what was being delivered. A horrifying idea, period. But Angela Merkel, too, coherent with the messaging of the US's allies that it's obvious the Assad regime was behind this. They say they won't be involved in military action, but they again remind everybody that there was a US resolution back in October 2013 which told Syria to get rid of its chemical weapons program. We're now on the second time when that's palpably not true. Britain meeting shortly as well to decide what level of response it will have, and really the drum beating fast towards military action, regardless of what the US Commander-in-Chief tries to do to tamper his perhaps ill-advised recent tweet.
And in no small irony, Nick, we'll remember that the U.S. wound up relying on Russia to secure the agreement that the Assad regime would take away its chemical weapons. We see how well that worked. Nick, there is a big argument going on here about what the implications are in Syria if there is U.S. military action. Do me a favor, just list some of the potential eventualities that have to be taken into consideration.
Well, biggest problem here, of course, is that we have U.S. troops on the ground in northern Syria, who've been fighting ISIS on their behalf. Now, just in February, it was horrifying. We were here ourselves trying to take land off those Syrian Kurds that have American backing. They pretty much failed, but they had quite a lot of Russian mercenaries in their midst. Their own special forces close to that position that was being advanced upon, and without knowing, frankly, they killed dozens, it seems, of Russian line that even today the Kremlin trumpeted as still being functional fights. So given the lack of transparency, the lack of trust between the broader geopolitical strikes could take out Russian troops, that we could find US troops on the receiving end of any response, and there are so many different actors here, frankly, that we have no idea what will happen.
For us, there are also big divisions. Tell CNN that federal agents who raided Michael Cohen's apartment and office were is preparing an extensive campaign to try to plan. What does it
The situation is so and still are on this. All right, we want to bomb Assad for punishment.
Stop the chemical attack.
Assad out of office, which we are incapable of doing and apparently don't even want to at this point. How do you stop Assad then?
And who says that Assad, being a butcher and a murderer of his own people using an internationally illegal method, and he's done it with conventional legal methods as well, gives authority to the United States to bomb in Syria?
Well, this goes back to the question that you've been discussing, for weeks here, which is what is the role of Congress in deciding where we go to war? We are still, all of these military operations in the Middle East are still pursuant to the authorization of the use of military force passed in 2001 after 9/11. Congress has not weighed in on any of these ever since. It's a complete dereliction of their duty, but they are politically, they'd rather dump it all on the president and not be and not
it's
be
not
responsible.
a Trump. This is not a Trump criticism.
No.
Obama, Bush, Clinton, back to Bush 41, all have done this because presidents will take power if you're going to give it to them, but that's why we have checks and balances. So David Gregory, Jim Jordan, Tim Kaine, everybody we've had on the show, except maybe for Scott Taylor, maybe he didn't, or Adam Kinzinger, one of them said that he doesn't think that Congress needs to do this. But the majority has said, yes, Congress should weigh in. Where are they? What's going to happen?
Yeah, well, I don't know that they're going to weigh in, frankly, but I think you're still going to be making this argument, and it's a good one, and there's going to be a strike on Syria. And, there's not going to be a revolt in this country or in the Congress that the president is off course. And I think that that's one of the reasons is what you're seeing this morning, is that there is international consensus and has been since the end of the First World War about this red line using chemical weapons as being a violation of international law. And I think that this president, like the last one, is going to stop short of committing the United States to some kind of endgame in Syria that goes beyond his use of chemical weapons. I mean, I think, Obama tried to negotiate his way out of toppling Assad. That didn't work. There's no indication that this administration is committed to even moving that hard. The people who have, in their view, vital national security interests are the Russians and the Iranians to do their bad business throughout the Middle East and for Putin to have access to a deep water port. They're the ones who are really willing to commit forces to Syria, not the United States.
Okay, let's move on to, there are many developments in the Russia investigation. First, Jeffrey, this is part of the Southern District of New York's investigation. So now, as you know, there's a separate investigation that Robert Mueller handed off to the investigators in New York. And it names Donald Trump for the first time in a search warrant. Significant?
It's hugely significant. I mean, just, we sometimes, I think, get, those of us who follow this story carefully, get involved in the details and the author.
Oh, it's hard for anybody to follow all the threads.
But
so
it is.
It's important to say when something different happens.
But, the United States Attorney's Office, the federal prosecutors, are investigating the President of the United States. Think about how unusual that is in American history. I mean, it has happened a handful of times, but the President is now the focus, apparently a subject, not a target, of a criminal investigation. Having been a prosecutor, having known what this is like, the pressure that puts someone under, the gnawing uncertainty, the anxiety that you feel when you are under criminal investigation is so enormous, especially if you think you have something to hide, especially if you think the prosecutors are being unfair. It is just a deeply, deeply important moment in the history of this administration.
Hey, David, where do you think we are in terms of boiling point within the White House, within the president's head, about what he needs to do with this investigation?
I think that the president and those around him, they look at recent history and they look at the Lewinsky scandal and the impeachment of Bill Clinton, and they say, this is what starts to happen. All these spokes that get farther and farther away from the hub of this investigation draw you in and your personal business and your sexual past, and that's the kind of stuff that trips you up. And so I think, we're at a fast simmer reaching a boil because this president who doesn't listen to people thinks, well, yeah, I'll just start firing people. I'll find a way to really unwind this investigation that's getting out of control. Because you look at some of these things, we don't know what they amount to. Payoffs, evidence of, financial wires, potential wire fraud, all of these things. We don't know if they're crimes, but we know that there's circumstantial reason to believe that the timing is important with regard to the chief investigation, which is the developments coming out of Russia or WikiLeaks that were aimed at meddling in the election and digging up dirt on Trump's opponent. So, the relevance of all of this will continue to shake out. But I think now, as in Trump's mind, as this gets farther afield, the closer he gets to thinking he's going to have some, especially political justification to take some strong action.
And I think Rod Rosenstein is the one who is really, really in danger. I think firing Mueller, even Trump recognizes that would set off, millions of people in the streets. And legally, I think he has difficulty firing Mueller. Not impossible, but he could fire Rod Rosenstein tomorrow. And I think that is the much more likely scenario at this point.
All right. Jeffrey Toobin, David Gregory, thank you for the analysis. So in just hours, Secretary of State nominee Mike Pompeo will be in the hot seat. Does he have the votes to be confirmed as Secretary of State?
The Senate confirmation hearing for Mike Pompeo kicks off in about 2 hours. President Trump's nominee to replace Rex Tillerson as Secretary of State is going to need to get at least one Democrat vote to be confirmed. Will it happen? CNN's Manu Raju live in the hearing room on Capitol Hill. We got a wager going?
He's thinking.
Manu's tight with his money.
He's thinking a lot.
Now expect a pretty aggressive line of questioning from Democrats on this committee, probably far more aggressive than what we saw last year when Rex Tillerson came before this same committee, in large measure because Mike Pompeo, as a CIA director, has been in the middle of a number of key decisions, perhaps more than any other cabinet member. And members want to know exactly what the administration is thinking about some of these key issues, in addition to what Mike Pompeo is doing himself, views about these issues himself. Already we're getting a sense about what Mike Pompeo might say based on his closed-door meetings with senators that I've talked to, as well as the excerpts from his opening statement, which he has provided, suggesting that he'd be open to fixing the Iran deal, not just nixing it, also suggesting that Russia, the years of soft policy towards Russia are over, expecting tougher line against Russia. He's expected to be pushed, especially on Syria and North Korea. But one thing that he wants to do coming in is dispel the notion that he is a hawk on these issues and is a warmonger of sorts, as Democrats are concerned about. This is what he says from his opening statement. He says, so when journalists, most of whom have never met me, label me or any of you as hawks, war hardliners, or worse, I shake my head. War is always the last resort. I would prefer achieving the president's foreign policy goals and unrelenting diplomacy rather than by sending young men and women to war. Now, the challenge for Pompeo going forward is that Democrats have a one-seat disadvantage on this committee. And Republicans, they already have one Republican no vote, Republican Rand Paul. That means if he were to advance Democrat, they need to get at least one Democrat to support his nomination to get a favorable recommendation to be sent to the floor. And that's the ultimate question about whether or not any Democrats will jump ship. That's something we'll see today, whether or not any Democrats are willing to vote for his nomination, Allison.
Okay, let's try to get the answer to that right now, Manu. Thank you for the reporting. Joining us is Senator Robert Menendez, the ranking Democrat on the Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, thanks for being here. Do you have a sense of whether or not you will support Mike Pompeo?
Well, I think a lot of it's going to depend upon Mike Pompeo's performance today, his answers to some critical questions, a sense of his worldview, whether diplomacy is going to be really his mantra, or is he going to be a facilitator of the president's worst instincts?
Well, I mean, let's just start with what Manu just reported. Are you someone who considers Mike Pompeo hawkish?
Well, I look at a series of his actions in the past, and one might view it that way. But I listened to his comments on Russia that he has in his prepared opening statement, saying this administration has been muscular. It has been anything but muscular. Congress passed overwhelmingly into the CATSA legislation sanctions that are mandatory against Russia that still have not been implemented by the administration. So I think there's a difference between the rhetoric and the actions as he tries to paint the administration in a tougher light than what they've been on Russia. A president who can never even invoke Putin as someone who committed an attack on our democracy, but says that a judge who issues an order to go ahead and seek documents from his former lawyer is an attack on the country. So you have a totally different messaging here than what I've heard the President of the United States say.
You met with Mike Pompeo on Monday, correct?
Yes, I did.
And did you pose any of these, concerns or reservations you have directly to him, and was he able to quell those?
Well, I did. So I asked him for his worldview. I asked him about democracy as our first and most important line of defense. I asked him about what happens if you walk away from the Iran deal, what's the follow-on strategy. And look, he's very affable, he's smart, but at the end of the day, he himself would admit he doesn't have any deep substance in foreign policy questions, and I'm not sure that he's going to be able to give us a good sense and flush out some of the strategies, which is what this administration is critically lacking of, whether it be on Syria, on Russia, on China. This president works on impulses, not on strategies. And you can't work on impulse in a world that is so insecure as we find it today.
And I do want to get to Syria in 1 second, but did he tell you that he wanted to get out of the Iran deal?
Well, he basically said that, the president is pretty much focused on getting out of the deal unless he gets all the elements that he wants to, quote unquote, fix it. But the problem is that even if that's the case, the question is, what's the follow-on? If the United States unilaterally leaves the deal, and if we don't have our European allies with us, are you going to snap back the sanctions that I actually wrote? And if you do so, some of those secondary sanctions will affect our European partners. Do you expect them to comply? Do you expect them to crumble under the weight of the sanctions and join us? Or do you expect retaliatory sanctions? And if so, what does that mean to us?
Very quickly, do you see any way that Mike Pompeo does not become the next Secretary of State?
Well, that's really going to depend upon his performance today, and depending upon that, it will depend upon the vote in the committee, as well as then as it moves to the floor. So I think this is a critically important position to the nation's national security, and he'll have a high bar to meet.
Okay, let's talk about Syria. So there's breaking news that we've just reported this hour, and that is that French President Macron says he has proof positive that the chemical attack, the chlorine attack, was launched by Assad on his own people. What do you want to see the U.S. response be?
Well, what I've wanted to see the United States do for some time, what I've been advocating, is that the administration needs a strategy as to Syria. If we want to defeat ISIS, if we want to end the civil war, if we want to end the humanitarian disaster that Syria has become, then you have to have a comprehensive strategy. The president once before fired missiles at Assad for using chemical weapons. It didn't ultimately end the use of chemical weapons, as we have now seen. So a military strike is only one element of what is more important. We need to get a coalition of the willing to ultimately isolate not only Assad, but the countries that are propping him up, which is Russia and Iran. We need our Middle Eastern partners to be engaged, if they truly care about Syria, to begin to economically isolate Russia and Iran. So there's many elements of this that are lacking. I just don't see the president having a strategy as it relates to that. It's one of the issues we'll ask Director Pompeo.
And whether you have that coalition, whether the U.S. has that coalition or not, should Congress have to authorize whatever military move is going to happen next with Syria?
Yes, because there is a difference between the authorization to fight ISIS and now a military action, particularly if it's a prolonged one, that ultimately strikes at Syria for the use of chemical weapons. Look, the use of chemical weapons is barbaric, it's horrific, and it has to be dealt with. But at the end of the day, when you're going to take those types of actions, as President Obama sought to do originally, when I was the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, he came before asked the committee for a authorization for the use of military force. I drafted one that got Republicans and Democrats to vote for it in the committee. He took it to the G20 summit in Russia, and got then the chemical weapons that existed to be given up. So the reality is Congress has to play a role in this, and I don't think the president has the authority to do that under the guise of fighting ISIS.
Okay, so what is Congress doing to that end? I know that Senator Corker may unveil a new war powers bill. So how will you insist that the president consult you and come to you for permission or for authorization for the next move?
Well, the committee is soon considering a new authorization for the use of military force to undo the 2001 and other authorizations, to narrow it more focusedly, to not let an attack upon an associated force be considered an attack upon a state itself. Those are very important. But in the interim, I think that the president has to understand that the best way that we ever engage in a military action is when we have the collective support of the country. He needs to come to Congress and ask for that support, ask for an authorization of use of military force.
Senator Robert Menendez, thank you very much for being on with us and explaining your perspective on all of this. And stay with CNN. Wolf Blitzer is going to anchor our special coverage of Mike Pompeo's confirmation hearing that starts at 9 a.m. Eastern. Chris.
All right, there's a new allegation about a hush money payment to protect President Trump during the campaign. I emphasize the last part because that's what would be legally operative here. It again involves another bombshell by the New Yorker that suggests a potential pattern of payoffs to bury unflattering stories about Donald Trump in order to protect him during the 2016 campaign. Once again, it involves the National Enquirer allegedly paying someone off, in this case 30 grand, to catch and kill a salacious story from a former Trump Tower doorman. The New Yorker's Ronan Farrow is once again on the case and joins us. Always good to see you. Thank you for being here. So what does the reporting suggest?
So the reporting suggests that there was this salacious rumor of an affair, potentially a child born out of the affair, largely baseless. We didn't uncover any evidence that this was real. However, what we did uncover is source after source within AMI saying they paid this money.
AMI, the parent company of the
National Enquirer. They then added a liquidated damages clause to this deal within the company, saying he would have to pay $1 million if he ever breathed a word of this. And then they killed the story. And, we heard over and over again that was a direct order coming down from David Pecker, the head of this company, who has publicly professed an allegiance to Trump. And this is significant, every legal expert told us, because it establishes a pattern now. This is potentially the third illicit payment during the election cycle. Stormy Daniels, which was a direct deal with that woman to silence a story that she had, and then Karen McDougal's story, which she first talked to us as well, and another example of, through this same company that owns the National Enquirer, a story being caught and killed.
Sources suggest to you that this is somehow part of the matrix of interest in this current warrant that we saw executed on the president's attorney?
So we know, the New York Times and other publications have reported, that one of the points of interest of the FBI raids this week was indeed communications related to these kinds of shut down stories and the relationship between AMI and the president. And certainly, what the sources told us over and over again, and the documents we had suggested, was that this was part of a pattern of that close allegiance between the president and this organization.
Any Trump lawyer fingerprints on what you're looking at now?
We do report that Michael Cohen, according to multiple individuals involved in this story, was making regular calls. Now, we should say, we reached out to Michael Cohen. He hung up on us a couple of times, and, we do not get a response from him. He did talk to some other reporters circling the story and, confirmed that there was some communication about this.
The pocket becomes relevant, right? It gets tricky when it's AMI. Catch and kill, by the way, is they go out, they buy the story, and then they squash it. Then you have to determine why they did that. That's harder than just showing what the president's lawyer may have done, right? Because you have an obvious affinity there. So with David Pecker, the head of AMI, you would have to show that not only did he do this to kill it, but he did it to kill it to help the president during the campaign, and that would really be an in-kind contribution.
Right. So from an election law standpoint, these are all very difficult things to establish. Even if this was all to benefit the president, hypothetically speaking, but Michael Cohen was doing it to benefit the president's personal life, that would be a potential out from any election law violations. There are also exemptions to these election law standards for media companies doing legitimate journalistic work. But the legal experts we talked to pointed out, if it can be established that this was a pattern in which AMI and the National Enquirer were not acting journalistically, they were purely intending to kill these stories on behalf of the president, those exemptions might not apply.
Not easy. Side question. You are becoming a known commodity in this business. You have a book on foreign policy coming out later this month. Where does your interest lie in this line of stories? Because this narrative gets beat up, right? People will say who voted for the president, I didn't vote for a priest, Ronan Farrow, and this is all in the past. And what he does in his own personal life, that's stuff that doesn't matter to me. I care about my taxes. Where's your interest journalistically?
So I think one thing that I've very clearly established in this body of reporting is it's very nonpartisan. Harvey Weinstein, I broke that story,
Sure.
and along with a group of other brave reporters who spent a long time banging their heads against the wall, that was a major Democratic force to be reckoned with. He was a big donor, a big Hillary Clinton supporter. And actually what we see in what's being exposed about this pattern of payments, allegedly on behalf of the president, is the same actors involved. Dylan Howard, the National Enquirer. These were all individuals also working to suppress stories on behalf of Harvey Weinstein. We also report in this story that Lanny Davis, a Democratic operative and a close Clinton confidant, and Boyce Schiller, another firm run by a prominent Democratic lawyer, were involved in AMI's and the National Enquirer's efforts to shut down this story that we're reporting on today. So what this is about is systems, Chris. This is about the most powerful people in the country having the ability to silence and change the news narrative at will. And I think that the public should know that. And look, I'll defer to the election law experts. They say that this is worth scrutinizing.
Well, we look forward to seeing where it takes you. Ronan Farrow, thank you very much.
Thank you.
As we were talking about before, when the book comes out on foreign policy and your theories about how the military is shaping too much of policy.
War on Peace. It's out April 24th. You can pre-order it right now.
Great, I will, although I'd rather a free copy. No, you're welcome.
You get a free one, Chris.
Thank you. Allison.
I like the title. All right, meanwhile, there's bad blood boiling over at last night's Yankees-Red Sox game. The bench is clearing twice. We'll tell you what. Bad blood on the field in baseball's most heated rivalry. The Yankees and the Red Sox renewing their hatred in a bench-clearing brawl. Coy Wire has more in the Bleacher Report. What happened, Coy?
Allison, boys being boys, you're grounded, kids. This Bleacher Report brought to you by Ford, going further so you can. After the Red Sox clobbered the Yankees 14-1 on Tuesday at Fenway, New York swung back last night, literally. Boston's Joe Kelly drilling Yankees Austin Tyler, 98-mile-per-hour fastball. That'll make you heated. Check this out. This rivalry dating back nearly 120 years has the gas poured on it. Benches clear, bullpens clear, 3 players ejected. Yankees win in the end, 10-7. To Las Vegas, baby, in their inaugural season. The Golden Knights making their Stanley Cup playoffs debut with a pregame performance fit for a show on the Vegas Strip. Knights fighting with swords and shields, a glowing performance by a glowing drumline, creating this epic atmosphere for the Knights, who continue their historic run with a 1-0 win. In Pittsburgh against the Flyers, Sid the Kid Crosby and the Penguins were the best thing on ice since my bourbon last night. Crosby with this highlight reel deflection, look at this. One of his 3 goals on the night. Pittsburgh seeking a 3rd straight Stanley Cup victory, looking like the defending champs. A 7-0 win. That's good stuff, Cuomo.
That is good stuff. You don't drink. Your body beautiful. Don't try to play like that. You were drinking a protein shake. 1 o'clock. Probably didn't even have.
Trying to grow some hair on my chest, man. Anywhere.
I'll talk to you later, handsome. All right. Things could get testy at Mike Pompeo's conference. He is going to need at least 1 Democrat to support his nomination. Will Pompeo be confirmed? Let's get the bottom line with CNN political director David Chalian. Yes or no?
Sure, yes. I'll go with a prediction. He'll get confirmed.
Which Democrat is going to break from the pack?
Well, as you know, although it hasn't happened in 40 years, you can still get a nomination to the floor without getting it through a formal committee vote. But you are right. The more likely path here is that some Democrats will come on board. We know there have already been some Democrats who have stated, hey, I did vote to confirm him for CIA director. I learned some things during that time. I'm not going to vote for him for Secretary of State. That poses a problem. But guys, it's an election year. And a lot of these red state Democrats that are up for re-election are feeling potential pressure points, even in a really big Democratic year, to not just knee-jerk reject the president's appointees because it's the president. So you can see the Republicans making some attempts to try to pressure those red state Democrats to get on board.
So yes, and look at the red state Democrats. That's where it'll likely come from. All right, good so far. What is the chance?
You get an A so far.
What is the chance that the president says, hey, we're going to bomb, or doesn't say anything but alerts the leadership in Congress, hey, we're going to bomb, and that they say, no, 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 you have to come to us, present a plan, we're going to have to debate it, and we're going to have to vote, because that's what the law and Constitution demands. We've punted for too long, Mr. President.
Well, some members of Congress will absolutely say that. We know that without a doubt, Chris. We've seen the former Democratic vice presidential nominee, Tim Kaine, take a leadership role in this fight. We've also heard from some Republicans that have concerns about getting an authorization to use military force here, and that trying to use the one dating back to 9/11 is not necessarily the right way to go here. Do I think overall majorities in Congress are going to stop the president from doing that? No. We didn't see that a year ago when he launched surgical strikes. I don't think the political calculus has changed in any way that they would sort of all of a sudden the Republican majorities would try to prevent him from doing so now.
The president sent out tweets yesterday that sounded as though incoming missiles were imminent in terms of Syria. Then today he backed off saying, oh, no, I never said when anything was going to happen. Do we have any sense from the White House of any sort of time frame or what the president is thinking?
No, and by design, right? Except for the president's tweet that he's already cleaning up, as you noted. He didn't just slightly back off this. I mean, he ran away and chose an entirely different tact because he had gotten a bit of brushback, don't you think, of criticism that he was doing exactly what he criticized President Obama for doing, that he doesn't telegraph his moves. And that's where Sarah Sanders yesterday at the briefing wanted to reposition the White House, and the president himself coming to that effort this morning. But he was already out there telegraphing. I mean, other than saying, hey, it's going to happen Sunday at 10 o'clock Eastern, just when Jim Comey's interview is beginning to roll, other than saying something like that, he telegraphed what his actions were. And now this morning, it's like, well, maybe or maybe not. Yet at the same time, I will note, you do start seeing some international partners coming around to who's responsible for this. Action does need to be taken. So I don't think a military strike at all has been taken off the table. But clearly, the political blowback that the president got, he wanted to clean up a little bit.
Doesn't everything that you're saying right now militate in favor, even more so, of having Congress step up and assert its lawful authority here?
I mean, there has been a decade-long debate about this now, about Congress stepping up to its responsibilities to actually authorize.
Although it's never been officially debated, right? It never gets on the floor.
Not debated
it's always
with an actual piece
and
of
on television shows, and then nothing happens.
Yes. And that's why I'm very skeptical, Chris, that things have changed. I don't anticipate that there's some groundswell for this to happen. You will hear the debate over the television airwaves again, no doubt, and it's a worthy debate that the country, I hope, is tuned into and listens to. This is representative and point of view. I just don't see the pressure point that the president is going to feel that he actually has to follow through with going to Congress first. You
brought up James Comey's interview this Sunday, and as we've heard, the RNC is also preparing a media blitz to kind of, denigrate him, I suppose. So are we about to start seeing those commercials and all of that?
It certainly sounds that way. I mean, Jeff Zeleny reporting this morning that the RNC is sort of setting up a war room, a website that says Lion Comey, to use the president's terminology and nickname his penchant for nicknames. So there does seem to be a all-out effort to make sure to try to do sort of character assassination of Jim Comey so that his credibility is called into question just at the time he is trying to put forth the case and explain what he put in this book about everything he experienced with his time with President Trump.
Brother Chalian, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
An A for the whole thing.
Well, thank you, Allison. I appreciate it.
Very good.
We have the good stuff coming up.
But first, your morning coffee may do more than give you a buzz. It may actually be good for you. Nutritionist Lisa Dreyer has more in Food as Fuel.
Did you just admit you put booze in?
Research suggests caffeine can offer a range of possible health benefits. They include improved memory, enhanced athletic performance, liver health benefits, and possible protection against Parkinson's disease. Coffee in particular, that is regular as well as decaf, may actually help you live longer. One study found 4 cups daily may reduce the risk of early death. Coffee has also been shown to lower the risk of diseases such as type 2 diabetes, colorectal cancer, Alzheimer's, and skin cancer. Of course, preparation matters. If you low fat over cream and avoid sugar. Everyone's tolerance varies, but in general, healthy adults can safely consume up to 400 milligrams of caffeine a day. That's about 4 8-ounce cups of coffee. However, expectant moms and those with heart conditions might wish to forgo their cup of joe.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm John Berman. A huge day of news, and we are chasing it all in just moments. The confirmation hearing for the president's pick for Secretary of State, CIA Director Mike Pompeo. He faces a grilling from lawmakers about his record and his reputation as a war hawk. This as we get major breaking news that could influence the imminent military action against Syria. The French president says there is proof that the Syrian regime launched a chemical attack against its own people. At this moment, U.S. air power, Navy destroyers, submarines preparing for a possible order from the president as the nation's top security officials meet in just the next few hours. In all of this, on top of big developments that might spell new legal jeopardy for the president and his personal lawyer. For the very first time, we know the president's name is on a search warrant in an FBI investigation. Let's go right to Abby Phillip, live at the White House for the latest. Abby.
Well, good morning, John. We are learning some new details about that search warrant that authorized the raid on Michael Cohen's home and office this week. Apparently, federal investigators wanted to know what documents or any communications that Cohen might have had with President Trump about Hollywood video. That's that election, and not clear what exactly they're looking for, what there might be, but they are apparently looking for any evidence of communication with Cohen and the president about that tape, and perhaps if there was any effort on the part of Cohen to suppress the release of that tape, which was ultimately leaked by some kind of whistleblower to the Washington Post. Now, you know, this also tracks pretty closely with some of the other stories, a litany of other stories, really, about secret payments allegedly made to women, Karen McDougal, Stormy Daniels, and others, in order to suppress their stories about their alleged relationship with the president during the campaign. But of course, this is the first time, as you mentioned, that the president's name is on a search warrant in conjunction with that raid. And you can perhaps see why President Trump was so angry about the prospect that Cohen's documents, a cell phone, other items were seized in a surprise raid earlier this week. He's angry in part because it seems very much that this investigation is also about him.
Abby, we also have something of a cleanup on aisle tweet this morning. The president trying to explain or perhaps justify the announcement that he made on Twitter that there would be missile strikes in Syria.
Yeah, who knew? Twitter and missile strikes don't quite go together, but here's President Trump trying to clarify what he said yesterday. He said in a tweet this morning, "I never said when an attack on Syria would take place, could be very soon or not soon at all. In any event, the United States under my administration has done a great job of ridding the region of ISIS. Where is our thank you, America?" Now, this is confusing. If you're confused, you would be forgiven for being that way, because yesterday the president said said in a tweet pretty directly, the missiles are coming, speaking to Russia and warning them against their own threat that they could shoot down U.S. missiles if they were to strike in Syria. But also our sources tell us that when the president tweeted that yesterday morning, it was done before any final decision had been made about the course of action in Syria. The U.S. is still conferring with its allies in Europe about what to do if they are going to strike, when and where. And also today we know that the president's national security team is meeting on this very issue. So this is still well under discussion, and clearly the president trying to walk back a little bit of some of that certainty that he put in his tweet yesterday with a little bit of confusion this morning, frankly, John.
All right, Abby Phillip at the White House monitoring that. Obviously, a very important situation there. Meanwhile, a new report this morning that perhaps gets to many of the same issues at play here in the searches on Michael Cohen's home and offices, namely the issue that many people close to the president, close to then candidate Donald Trump, paid to kill stories that might hurt him. In this case, a payment from the parent company of the National Enquirer to one of Trump's former doormen, $30,000 to keep rumors quiet. And this was just months before the same company paid a Playboy model who claims she had an affair with Donald Trump. The AP broke the story. Ronan Farrow wrote about it in the New Yorker. Here is Ronan just moments ago on New Day.
So the reporting suggests that there was this salacious rumor of an affair, potentially a child born out of the affair, largely baseless. We didn't uncover any evidence that this was real. However, what we did uncover very firmly was source after source within AMI saying they paid this money.
AMI, the parent company of the
National Enquirer. They then added a liquidated damages clause to this deal with this individual who had the information from supposedly within the company, saying he would have to pay $1 million if he ever breathed a word of this. And then they killed the story. And, we heard over and over again that was a direct order coming down from David Pecker, the head of this company, who has publicly professed an allegiance to Trump. And this is significant, every legal expert told us, because it establishes a pattern now. This is potentially the third illicit payment during the election cycle. Stormy Daniels, which was a direct deal with that woman to silence a story that she had. And then Karen McDougal's story, which she first talked to us as well. And another example of through this same company.
All right, here to discuss now former federal prosecutor Jennifer Rogers, white-collar criminal defense attorney Sarah Azari, and CNN national political reporter MJ Lee. MJ, let's just fill in the blanks here just a little bit there. Ronan Farrow explaining this news story is the National Enquirer, the parent company paying $30,000 to keep a rumor quiet. The Enquirer also paid Karen McDougal for what here? What's going on?
Well, I think what Ronan was saying here, that there seems to be now a pattern of this kind of behavior, is really, really key. If you look at the two stories and the two things that are being reported, yes, there are such similarities that are so striking. In this story with the Trump Tower doorman, in 2015, it is being reported that he was interviewed by reporters working for American media and that he was paid $30,000 so that the publication could have exclusive rights to the story being that he knew that Donald Trump had fathered a child with a former employee. Now, Karen McDougal, remember, is the former Playboy playmate who says that she had a 10-month affair with Donald Trump and was also paid a large sum of money to stay quiet about this story so that they could publish the story. And then, as we all know, they never decided to publish the story. And she is now suing American media so that she can get out of that contract because she wants to speak out.
So, Jennifer, the issue here is the pattern, this alleged pattern that the Enquirer paid people to keep silent about stories that would hurt Donald Trump. Legally speaking, why would that matter?
Well, the legal issue really isn't the pattern. The legal issue is the conduct and the crimes that arise from the conduct, namely campaign finance violations and probably bank fraud, money laundering, that sort of thing. The pattern is important because it's evidence, right? So you now are showing acts that in and of themselves are likely crimes, or maybe not if you actually, like in the Access Hollywood tape, don't have, the actual quashing, but show this evidence of a pattern. And so, that just gives you more evidence when you go into court to prove those crimes.
We'll get to the Access Hollywood tape in just a moment here. The issue is you have to prove, Sarah, that this was, in order for it to be legal and a campaign finance violation, that it had a campaign value. It was to help candidate Donald Trump, not husband Donald Trump.
Right, exactly.
Not businessman, Donald Trump.
I mean, it's not about adultery, as I've repeatedly said. This is about a critical time right before the elections where there is this pattern, as we've said, not just by AMI, but by Michael Cohen involved in all of these deals to quash any negative information about a presidential candidate. That's what's wrong here, along with the crimes that Jennifer's speaking about. The tax fraud that might come up, the money laundering, the bank fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud. I mean, I think this is just this raid is just a small crack in the lid of a can of worms that is just going to spill out.
So you brought up the Access Hollywood tape here, so let's transition to that. By the way, I should say that Michael Cohen's name is all over this Inquirer story, as it was in the former Inquirer story that he had contacts with AMI, David Pecker. Michael Cohen's apartment, his hotel room, his offices raided. We now know that the president's name was on this warrant. What does it matter that the president's name was on this warrant?
Well, it clearly establishes that he is involved in this investigation. I think these communications that the search warrant is seeking are between Michael Cohen and the Trump campaign, the campaign aides, or maybe even Donald Trump directly. So, again, to the extent that some of these communications are not privileged or they are privileged and they fall under the crime fraud exception, these communications are key evidence, like Jennifer said, as to what crimes occurred.
Access Hollywood. When we all saw this yesterday, Jennifer, that the Access Hollywood tape that we all remember so well, where the president says he could sexually assault women and get away with it because he was famous. When we saw that, our eyebrows are raised. What would be potentially illegal about communications between Michael Cohen and or the president and or the campaign and or anyone else about the Access Hollywood tape?
So conspiracy requires two bad actors. You can't conspire with yourself. So you need two people. So Michael Cohen can't just do all of this on his own and be guilty of a conspiracy. He has to be conspiring with someone. So that person might be Donald Trump. So when they're talking about trying to benefit the campaign by hushing these up, that's a crime in and of itself potentially, but it's only a conspiracy if there are two people involved. So they want to know what was said. They may or may not ever be able to charge the president, but at minimum they could charge Michael Cohen with the conspiracy if they learned that there were criminal conversations between the two of them.
But I guess what I'm getting at is what would make it a criminal conversation? I'm sure MJ and I have both had countless political operatives, and Cohen is a lawyer and an operative here for Donald Trump, yell at me in person and over the phone not to go with the story that they don't want me to go with. If they don't want someone to go with the Access Hollywood tape, that in and of itself isn't illegal. If they were trying to squash it another way, what way would it have to be for it to be a problem?
Well, you have to have some sort of element of coercion or bribery, right? So what we're talking about is a benefit to the campaign, and it has to be monetized in some fashion. So it's a benefit to the campaign if they squash a story by paying someone money, and you can say that the benefit is basically the cost of that money. So that's really the crime here. And then also, of course, there's potential bank fraud and money laundering if they're hiding money in order to make these payments.
Last question on this, Sarah. What would the burden of proof need to be, or what evidence must they have, the FBI and investigators, to put the words Access Hollywood on this search warrant? It's probable cause. Would they need to have some evidence that there is something there already?
Well, I mean, the tape is out. Everyone's seen and heard Donald Trump on this tape, and there's denials by Donald Trump of being, it being fake, essentially fake news, that it's not him. I think there's sufficient evidence to name the Access Hollywood tape specifically in the search warrant, but I think the search warrant is far broader. I mean, a few days ago, we thought it was just about Stormy Daniels, and now we know that it goes to the entire pattern that we've discussed. So.
All right, Sarah, Jennifer, MJ, thank you very much for being with us. Appreciate it. Still to come, President Trump's National Security Council meeting this afternoon, as one world leader is now claiming there is proof the chemical weapons were used in Syria. How will the president respond and when? Plus, the search warrants against Michael Cohen show investigators may be zeroing in on events that occurred over 1 hour of one day in 2016. What happened and why the timing here might be significant. This morning, the French president is claiming he has proof that chemical weapons were used in the attack in Syria and that Syrian President Bashar Assad was behind it. This, as President Trump tried to clarify a statement he made on Twitter announcing a missile strike in Syria. Now he says, never said when an attack on Syria would take place, could be very soon or not so soon at all. In any event, the United States, where is our quote, thank you. The national security team will meet at the White House this afternoon about the way forward and see with the very latest. Barbara.
The president saying that he never gave anything away about when and if a strike would be. Tweet when he said missiles were coming. So this National Security Council meeting later today may in fact lead to some decisions. Nobody even knows that for sure at this point because no one knows what the president will decide, even though he said missiles were coming. The problem perhaps right now is if he backs off of that, he puts the allies, the French and the British, in a very difficult position because they believe Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria and Assad himself should be held accountable. So where we are right now, in advance of this National Security Council meeting later today in the region, there are a number of ships and aircraft all over the region, U.S. military assets that could be called upon to execute any operations that the president may decide to order. The military is openly working on options, ready to present them to the president, but he has to make that critical decision. And one of the key things really for everyone involved is the target list. Do you want to just go after airfields and things that might have been involved, locations that might have been involved in the chemical attack that they say Assad's regime executed? Or do you want to take the next step? Do you want to go after regime targets? That would be a significant escalation, and President Trump is well aware the Russians are watching every minute. John?
Indeed they are. Barbara Starr at the Pentagon, thank you very much. Joining me now, Senator Ed Markey, Democrat from Massachusetts, member of the Foreign Relations Committee that in just about an hour will question the president's nominee for Secretary of State. That is the current CIA Director, Mike Pompeo. Senator, I'll get to Mike Pompeo in just a moment. First, I want to get your reaction to the president trying to walk back his statement that missiles are coming in Syria. He now says, never says when, could be soon, could be not soon. What do you make of it?
Well, obviously, it's an incomprehensible, contradictory set of policies that he is putting out there. It's like a diplomatic a Tower of Babel. No one knows exactly what he means by these tweets, I think including his own advisors. It's a terrible way to conduct foreign policy, military policy, but I just think it's all part of the chaos that has existed in the White House almost from day one, and it continues on to today. We need a president who comes to Congress if he intends on having an escalation of this conflict in Syria, and he should lay out a comprehensive plan, and then he should ask for the Congress to vote affirmatively upon it. That is his responsibility to the Congress, and then the Congress's responsibility to discharge.
The funny thing is, it's always Congress's responsibility to do it, but many times the Congress shirks that responsibility, as does the executive branch. They choose not to ask for said authority. It's interesting and refreshing in some cases to hear you call for it right now. Would you support it? If the president came to you and said, respond to this chemical attack in Syria with air power, would you vote yes?
Well, I would first have to understand what the president's plan was. We are dealing with Russian troops. We are dealing with Iranian troops. We have to understand that perhaps he has a plan which would be of extended duration and much larger in terms of its operations. That is something that would require congressional debate because it could actually come to involve American young men and women in combat inside of Syria. And unless and until the president does that, then I don't think he should be allowed to engage in an activity that could lead inexorably to an escalation of American conflict in that country.
Is there a Markey plan in which you would support air power? Are you suggesting that any kind of airstrike would not be advisable right now?
No, I'm saying that any kind of an airstrike should in fact be brought to Congress so that we can understand what the president's plan is, whether or not he's going to involve in this attack plan. strikes that is likely to be from the Russians or Iranians
But
from
I guess
the
what I'm getting at,
administration's
Senator,
perspective.
does there need to be a military response to the apparent chemical attack, in your mind?
There's no question that the United States must be the moral leader, must be the leader in human rights on the planet. But we have to have a plan. We have to understand what we're doing. The president struck Syria last year in April. There was no plan. There was no follow-up. And as a result, there were no consequences to Assad. The Russians didn't bring out the chemicals as they promised. Assad continued to act as he had in the past. There was no follow-up plan. So he struck last year. If he does the same thing this year that he did last year, then it ultimately, historically, will have no import whatsoever.
I'm sure this will come up in the confirmation hearings for Mike Pompeo today. You had a chance to meet with the CIA director earlier in the week in advance of his confirmation hearings to be Secretary of State. Part of the president's
at nuclear of any nuclear in fact vitiated in the Middle East of our nuclear tensions.
The Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Senator, do me a favor, do something about the weather for Monday for the marathon up in Boston.
Got to be happy with the Celtics, Bruins, and Red Sox.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
This morning.